unaware I designed the ring she wore. My wife's fiancé bragged he bought it for her. Elias Cross was 37 years old the evening he stood 12 feet away from a man who was bragging to a room full of people about a ring that Elias had made with his own hands. He drove a 10-year-old Dodge work truck with a cracked dashboard and canvas drop cloths on the back seat. He wore plain cotton shirts and kept his nails short and clean the way men who worked with metal had to keep them. When people in Nashville's social circles met him at events he attended only reluctantly, they assumed he did something with his hands, renovation maybe, or custom furniture, and he never corrected the assumption, because the assumption had always served him better than the explanation. What Celeste had told Preston Ware was that her current husband was a craftsman who ran a little studio off 12th Avenue South, and that she had outgrown the life they shared, and that she was ready to be with a man who moved in the world the way she wanted to move in it. What Preston Ware told the table at the Whitfield Group charity dinner was that the ring he had given Celeste had come from the most exclusive custom atelier in Nashville, that the commission had taken 4 months, and that he had paid $34,000 for something truly one of a kind. What neither of them knew was that the man who had cut the stone built the setting by hand and pressed his own hallmark into the inner surface of that band was standing at the edge of the room, listening to every word with the steady attention of someone who already knew how the evening was going to end. What happened next would cost Preston Ware the story he had been telling about himself for nearly a year. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The workshop was Elias's favorite place in the world at 5 in the morning. The smell of it alone was enough: metal shavings and jeweler's wax, and the faint chemical undertone of the pickle solution he used to clean oxidized pieces after soldering. The skylight he had installed himself 4 years ago let in whatever light was available, and in October that meant a long, slow dawn that changed the color of the bench and the tools by increments, the way good light always moved, without announcing itself. The work table was steel-framed with a maple surface he had fitted and finished himself. Every tool in its designated place, gravers and burnishers in the front row, setting tools behind them, the flex shaft hanging at his right shoulder, the pen vise on its hook above the soldering block. He had built the table during his 2nd year in the studio, when he decided that a craftsman's environment was its own form of discipline. It had not moved since. Cross Atelier occupied the ground floor of a building he owned on 12th Avenue South. 3 full-time metalsmiths on staff. A waiting list for new commissions that ran 6 months at minimum, and a client roster that included private collectors, 2 museum permanent collections, and a clientele of people who had found the studio through referral alone because he had never once taken out an advertisement. The work spoke. That had always been sufficient. Celeste called it his little jewelry shop. He had let her. His grandmother, Naomi Cross, had been a seamstress in Memphis for 40 years. She had taught him to use his hands before he knew what he would use them for. Embroidery first, then leatherwork, then the metalworking class at the vocational annex that changed everything when he was 15. She had been dead for 9 years, but her voice lived in his hands when he worked. She used to tell him, "Elias, put your name inside everything you make. That's how the world knows it was yours, and how you remember it was too." He had taken that literally. Every piece that left Cross Atelier left, with a small cross mark pressed into an interior surface, fine enough to require a 10-power loop, permanent enough to outlast the piece. He had met Celeste Hargrove at a gallery opening in the Gulch neighborhood 6 years prior. She was coordinating the event, composed, precise, with the specific elegance of a woman who understood beautiful things even when she didn't make them herself. He liked her eye immediately. He had always liked people who noticed detail. They talked for 2 hours at the edge of the room while the party moved around them, and at the end of the evening he had asked if she wanted to have coffee, and she had said yes in a way that suggested she had already decided. They married a year and a half later, in a ceremony at a botanical garden outside of Nashville, small and deliberate, the way he preferred everything. The marriage had been warm for the first 3 years, and gradually cooler after that, not in any one conversation, but in the way a room changes temperature slowly enough that you stop noticing until you are cold. Celeste had grown more interested in Nashville's social architecture. She wanted gallery openings and charity dinners and the company of people building visible careers in visible industries. Elias preferred his bench. He understood that these were not the same preference, and that the distance between them had been widening at a rate neither of them had directly named. She had started wearing a new perfume that autumn, something warmer and more assertive than what she usually chose. She mentioned it only once, and he did not ask about it again. One Thursday evening, he came home from a trade conference in Atlanta a day earlier than planned, and found the kitchen clean and the house quiet in a way that felt deliberate rather than empty. There was a receipt on the counter near the junk drawer, not his. A dinner for two at a restaurant downtown, on a Tuesday evening when Celeste had been at her book club. He set the receipt down exactly where he found it. He went into the studio, and he worked. That was how he had always handled the things that needed handling, not by moving quickly, but by finding the work that required his full attention, and giving it that attention until the other thing had settled into its proper shape. He had finished 3 pieces that night that were not due for another 2 weeks. His hands knew how to do what his mind needed time to do. He came back to the receipt in the morning. Some things, his grandmother used to say, made themselves clear without being asked. The following morning, Elias arrived at the studio at his usual hour and sat down at the worktable with his commission log. It was a habit he had kept for 14 years, a weekly review of active and closed commissions, the kind of records discipline that came naturally to a man who understood that craft without documentation was just labor. He opened the log for the current calendar year and began reading from the beginning. He reached the entry for a commission placed 8 months ago. Client name, Preston Ware. Commission, bespoke solitaire engagement ring, pear-cut stone, warm setting, feminine and precise. Stone preference as noted during intake, pear-cut champagne diamond, elongated, ring size, 5.5. A note from the intake conversation written in Elias's own hand. Client stated the recipient was particular about elegance without ostentation, had grown up around real craft, and would know the difference. Elias read that sentence twice. He knew one person in the world who could be described with precisely those words in precisely that combination. He had described her that way himself once to a client asking for advice on a gift. Ring size 5.5. Pear-cut champagne diamond, warm setting. She'll know the difference. He set the log down with care. His hands did not shake. He pulled the physical commission file from the archive drawer, the paper folder he kept on every project, the intake form, the design sketches, the fabrication notes, the stone documentation, the photos of the finished piece at every stage. He spread them on the clean section of the bench and examined each one in sequence. His design sketches, his fabrication notes, his photographs of the stone before and after setting, his loop-level photograph of the finished band interior, showing the hallmark, the small cross mark, clear and definitive, in the inner surface of the gold. And at the back of the folder, the client pickup form. Preston Ware's signature. The date. The delivery note written in Preston's hand in the space-marked recipient. For C. She already knows what she wants. Make it something she'll never take off. He moved with the same deliberate calm that defined everything he did when what he was doing mattered. He photographed every page of the file with his studio camera, time-stamped. He forwarded the digital commission record to his personal archive. He pulled the studio's master inscription log and photographed the entry for that band's hallmark registration. He opened the calendar he and Celeste had shared for 6 years, still accessible, access never revised, and cross-referenced Preston Ware's 3 studio visits against Celeste's schedule. The consultation visit, a Tuesday afternoon. Celeste's calendar entry for that Tuesday, unavailable. The Stone approval visit, a Thursday morning. Celeste's calendar entry, morning meeting, no detail. The pickup date, a Friday. Celeste had taken a half day from her job for what she listed as a personal appointment. He sat with the full picture for a long time. His face remained perfectly calm. Then he picked up his phone and called Felicia Durant. He had held the commission file under his arm when he walked into Felicia Durant's office the next morning, and she had read every page of it in the same unhurried silence she brought to everything. Felicia Durant had practiced family and business law in Nashville for 26 years. She was the kind of attorney who listened more than she spoke. And when she spoke, the words had already been refined down to what was necessary and nothing beyond that. She set the last page down and removed her reading glasses. "She's been into my office 3 times this quarter," she said. Elias looked at her. "Celeste, she retained a consultation with my associate in August, 2 more in September. She was asking about marital asset classification, specifically. Whether a business building purchased before the marriage but expanded using marital funds could be reclassified." Felicia set her glasses on the desk. "The building on 12th Avenue South. Your studio." The studio had been purchased 7 years ago, before the marriage, with Elias's own capital. The expansion of the 2nd floor, the showroom addition, had been funded through the studio's own operating revenue, not marital funds. He had the records. She was building the argument before the conversation, Felicia said. "How long?" "At least since August. Possibly longer." She folded her hands. She was getting her paperwork in order. Elias, the building, the commission logs, the client revenue. She was building a picture of your assets as marital property. A pause. She doesn't know about the business structure. He had converted the studio into a separate legal entity 4 years ago, on Warren's advice, an LLC with its own operating agreement and clear predecessor documentation. Celeste had not been involved in that process and had never asked about it. "When this moves," Felicia said, "it will move quickly. I want to be ready when it does." He drove across the city to Germantown that weekend, to the Craftsman bungalow where his uncle Raymond Cross had lived for 30 years. Raymond was 68, a retired watchmaker, a man who had spent his life working inside the smallest tolerances and had developed the corresponding patience for everything else. His kitchen table was covered in the disassembled movement of a pocket watch he was restoring for someone, and he cleared a space without being asked. Elias told him the whole thing. The receipt, the commission file, the ring size, the intake notes, the hallmark. Raymond listened without moving. When Elias finished, Raymond said, "She wore your work to his table and let him take the credit for it. She may not have known." Raymond was quiet for a moment. "Did she know who made it?" "I don't think she ever asked." Raymond turned that over. "A man went and bought something from your hands without knowing whose hands he was buying from, and she put it on without knowing either." He picked up the watch movement and turned it slowly in the light. Between the two of them, nobody thought to ask where anything came from. That's its own kind of answer. He set the watch piece down. "The work always carries the maker," he said. That's not a sentiment. That's a fact of the craft. Elias spent the following week allowing Felicia's associate to complete the background review on Preston Ware. What came back was informative. Preston was 41, a wealth management consultant at a mid-sized firm in Nashville that had reorganized twice in the past 3 years. His title, Senior Managing Partner, was new, created in the restructuring, largely nominal. His LinkedIn presence projected scale that his operating structure did not fully support. He drove a leased Range Rover and wore the kind of watch that communicated a category of wealth he was still building toward. He had been engaged once before, 6 years prior, to a woman in Memphis. That engagement ended in a contested situation involving a joint account and a piece of property. There had been no legal filing. It had resolved quietly. There was also a prior involvement in Charlotte that ended similarly. Preston Ware was a man who understood how to present the surface of things. He had not, in this case, looked carefully enough at what was underneath. The $34,000 commission fee had been charged to a revolving credit facility tied to his firm's operating account. He had financed the ring. Felicia filed the preliminary response to Celeste's anticipated divorce action, establishing the studio's LLC status and the premarital purchase documentation for the building on 12th Avenue South. Everything was in order. Everything had always been in order. Elias spent that Thursday evening at home, eating the dinner he had made, listening to Celeste talk about an event she was planning. The ring was on her hand across the table. The kitchen light moved across the stone the way good light always moved, without announcing what it was illuminating. He answered her questions. He passed the bread. He washed the dishes. He did this for 11 days while Felicia completed the filings and the background work on Preston Ware came in, and the legal structure was assembled piece by piece in offices Celeste did not know existed. He went to the studio in the mornings and worked at the bench and spoke to his clients and reviewed the commission list, and did all of it without skipping a single step. He was a man who had learned a long time ago that the only way to do careful work was to do it at the pace the work actually required. He was not going to hurry this. He had built too much to hurry anything. Some things you carried without needing to say a word. The Whitfield Group held its annual charity dinner in the second ballroom of the Omni Nashville, and the room that Thursday evening was the kind of room Elias Cross ordinarily found ways to avoid: chandeliers and centerpieces, and the particular social pressure of 400 people performing their best version of themselves for one another. He was there because Cross Atelier had been nominated for the Southeastern Craftsman Award, announced at the dinner each year, and Felicia had told him to attend. He had come alone, in a dark suit, and taken a position near the bar with his water glass and his commission folder in the inside pocket of his jacket. He had seen Celeste and Preston across the room within the first 10 minutes. He had not approached them. He had waited. Preston was at a cocktail table with 4 people Elias did not know, and within 20 minutes of arriving, he had begun his story about the ring. Elias heard it from across the room, in fragments at first. Custom atelier, 4 months, the most extraordinary detail work. And then, when the group's laughter carried him 2 steps closer, in full. Preston was describing the commission with the practiced fluency of a man who had told the story many times. The pear-cut stone. The warm champagne color. The way the proportions were designed specifically for the woman wearing it. Months of work by a craftsman in Nashville whose name, Preston, admitted he couldn't quite remember, but whose price tag he remembered exactly. Elias set his glass down. He walked to the table. He was introduced by the man standing closest to Preston, a colleague who knew Elias from a previous event, as Elias Cross, the proprietor of Cross Atelier. The name landed on Preston's face, the way a name lands when it means nothing, and then, 1 second later, when it means everything. Preston said, "I'm sorry, what did you say the studio was called?" "Cross Atelier," Elias said. 12th Avenue South. "You came in 3 times last spring." The table had gone quiet in the way of people who have just realized they are witnessing something they will be describing to others for years. Preston straightened. "I don't see what that has to do with." Elias opened the inside pocket of his jacket and removed the manila envelope. He placed the intake form on the cocktail table. Preston's signature, the ring specifications, the stone preference, the ring size, and in Preston's own handwriting in the recipient field, for C. She already knows what she wants. He placed the design sketches. He placed the inscription log entry. "Every piece that leaves my studio has a hallmark pressed into the inner surface of the band," Elias said. "A small cross mark, applied under magnification. It's in the intake documentation, it's in the registration log, and it's on the ring your fiancé is wearing right now." Celeste had come across the room. She stopped when she understood what she was looking at. She looked at the documents. She looked at Elias. She looked at the ring on her hand with the expression of a person who has just been shown a map and realized they have been in the wrong place for a very long time. Preston said, "Look, the piece is paid for. I bought it. It doesn't matter who." The room's sound system softened. The evening's master of ceremonies approached the microphone at the front of the ballroom. "The Southeastern Craftsman Award," the MC said, into a room that had largely quieted, "goes this year to Elias Cross of Cross Atelier, Nashville, for sustained excellence in bespoke metalwork and jewelry design." The applause moved through the room. Elias gathered his documents from the table and folded the envelope. He looked at Preston Ware. "The commission is paid. The ring is yours." He kept his voice at the level of a man confirming a fact rather than making a claim. "The story you were telling about it was never yours to tell." He looked at Celeste for a long, even moment. There was nothing in his expression that required her to respond to. He had already said everything that needed saying, and he had said it in a room full of people who would carry it forward without any help from him. He turned and walked toward the stage. He did not look back. The ballroom was full and warm, and the applause continued as he walked. And the space between who he was and what people in that room had assumed about him had closed quietly and permanently. The way things close when the truth simply becomes visible. 8 months later, Cross Atelier occupied both floors of the building on 12th Avenue South. The showroom on the upper level had been finished in April. Clean walls, warm light. Each piece displayed individually in the way museum objects were displayed, which was to say with enough space around them that you were asked to look at the thing itself and not at the context. 3 of the pieces in the current collection had already sold before the opening. The waiting list for new commissions had extended to 14 months. The Southeastern Craftsman Award sat on the middle shelf of the studio's reference library between a gem identification guide from 1978 and the metalworking manual Elias had owned since trade school. He had not moved it to a more prominent position. It did not need a more prominent position. It knew where it was. The divorce had been finalized in 6 weeks. Felicia's premarital documentation on the studio building had been uncontested. The Lucy structure had held without question. Celeste had retained what was hers and nothing beyond it. There had been no dramatic proceedings, no contested motions, no extended dispute. The paperwork was clean. The way paperwork was clean when one party had been maintaining their records for 14 years and the other had not. Preston Ware's engagement to Celeste had ended within 2 months of the gala. He had relocated to Atlanta, where his firm's parent company had absorbed the Nashville operation in a restructuring. His LinkedIn profile had been updated twice since then, the title growing more elaborate each time, which in Elias's observation was what happened when the substance was moving in the other direction. Celeste was working in corporate event planning in Brentwood. Her name came up occasionally in conversations Elias did not go looking for. He registered it the same way he registered any fact that was true and irrelevant to the work in front of him. There was a woman named Dara in his life now. She worked in stone sculpture, primarily, with occasional pieces in mixed media that included metalwork, and she had come into the studio 8 months ago with intelligent questions about setting techniques that he had enjoyed answering. She came back twice more to look at reference materials, and on the third visit he had offered to show her the benchwork directly. She had stayed 3 hours and asked better questions each time. She was unhurried and attentive, and she did not perform for him or ask him to perform for her, which was, in his experience, the rarest and most important quality a person could offer. On a Saturday morning in late spring, Elias was at his bench before the Nashville light had fully organized itself. The skylight above him was still carrying the gray-blue of early morning, and he was working a section of a new piece, a bracelet, commissioned for an anniversary, the metalwork intricate enough to ask his full attention. He had been at it for 2 hours already. He turned the piece under the bench light. He picked up the graver. He made 4 small, clean passes at a section of the surface that no one but him would ever examine closely, and the line came out exactly as he had intended it. He set the piece down. He had put his name inside everything he ever made. That was how he always knew what was his. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.